You weren't a face anyone would remember. Just another young woman wedged between strangers on the morning train, headphones hanging loosely around your neck, a canvas travel bag pressed against your knees. That's all you seemed to be to the dozens of weary commuters around you. But they didn't know the history sealed behind your silence. They didn't know that beneath the calm expression and worn jacket sat someone who once shouldered burdens heavier than most of them would ever encounter. Someone who had carried memory like a weapon and pain like a badge. And when the doors slammed open and the air filled with the sharp bark of rifles, no one in that packed car could have guessed that the one who would change everything wasn't the man who entered with violence, but the woman they had dismissed as ordinary. And before we dive further into this story, let me ask you this. If you agree that courage often hides in silence, in faces the world overlooks, in people who seem unremarkable, until the day life demands something greater, then like and subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be remembered, because they show us that dignity and bravery are never about titles or uniforms. They are about the choice to rise when fear tells you to shrink. The morning had begun like countless others. The train a rolling corridor of fatigue and distraction, its steel frame cutting through the countryside as dawn painted the sky with streaks of pale gold. Inside the car fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, rows of seats filled with the shuffle of papers, the glow of phone screens, the sighs of workers rehearsing another long day. And in the middle of it sat Maya Carter, 28 years old, her dark hair tied back loosely, a faint scar above her left brow that most would miss. Her gaze drifting between the window and the reflection of faces around her, the kind of steady glance that absorbed details most others overlooked. She looked, to anyone paying attention, like a civilian traveler, someone heading back to the city after visiting family, maybe a graduate student or an exhausted nurse. And because no one wanted to look too closely at anyone on the morning commute, she blended in perfectly. Yet there was a poise in her stillness, an economy in the way she adjusted her bag, in the way her feet planted firmly to the floor as the train rocked, that set her apart from the restless tapping, the anxious shifting of those around her. Maya had promised herself she was done with the life that had once defined her, the life of night patrols, of split-second decisions, of weapons that had become extensions of her arms. She had folded it away 2 years earlier when she left the Army Rangers, telling herself that 26 was old enough to walk away, that combat tours and broken goodbyes had taken their share, that she deserved anonymity, silence, a life that didn't depend on vigilance. And so she tried to believe she was just another commuter, even if her posture, her scanning eyes, her instinctive measuring of exits betrayed the truth. She wasn't the only one with a story on that train, though. And 2 cars down sat another figure who had learned long ago how to read the undercurrents of fear, Captain Daniel Rhodes, Marine Corps, 46, his hair touched with gray at the temples, his frame broad and worn but steady, dressed that morning in civilian clothes. Just another passenger in jeans and a jacket, yet carrying himself with the unmistakable gravity of someone who had commanded men through fire. He had boarded quietly, carrying little more than a small leather satchel and the weight of too many deployments. His plan simple: spend 2 quiet days visiting his daughter in the city. But fate had never cared much for his plans, and that morning it decided to rewrite them in gunpowder. The first sign was subtle. The way the door between cars slid open too hard, the metallic clang louder than usual, and then came the boots. Heavy, deliberate, followed by voices sharp and foreign, cutting through the sleepy murmur of the car, rifles raised, masks covering half-shaven jaws, a half-dozen armed men spilling into the aisle, their eyes wild with intent. Their presence like a sudden storm in a place meant for routine. Passengers froze, some gasped, some clutched their children. One man fumbled his phone only to have it slapped from his hands by the butt of a rifle. And just like that, the air shifted from mundane to mortal, from ordinary to hostage. Commands flew out, broken English mixed with shouts in another tone. Orders to stay seated, to shut up, to hand over belongings, wallets, jewelry. And when someone hesitated, they were struck across the face, the sound echoing like a gunshot, even though the rifles hadn't yet fired. Fear rolled through the car like smoke, choking voices into silence. A baby cried and was hushed desperately by a trembling mother. And in the middle of it all sat Maya, her breathing steady, her eyes lowered but alert, her mind already counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, tracking the number of attackers, marking their positions, registering the way one favored his left leg, the way another kept glancing toward the rear car as if waiting for something, all the while forcing her shoulders to slump, her head to dip, so that anyone glancing her way would see nothing but another terrified civilian. The train jolted as if recoiling from its own passengers' terror, and the terrorists grew bolder, moving seat by seat, yanking bags, shouting for compliance. The leader, a tall man, with a voice like gravel, announcing that this wasn't just a robbery, that the world would know their names by sundown, that this train was no longer a commute but a statement. And though most passengers were too terrified to process the words, Maya caught them, weighed them, understood what they meant. This wasn't about money. It was about spectacle, and spectacles demanded blood. 2 cars down Rhodes rose slightly, under the guise of steadying a panicked woman beside him, his eyes scanning, registering just as quickly as Maya had. The way the group moved, the way they were organized, and in that instant, as his gaze swept the car, he caught hers. A flash of dark eyes that didn't match the cowering posture. A steadiness too controlled to be accidental. And though they didn't know each other, a silent understanding passed between them, brief, electric, the recognition of 2 soldiers hiding in plain sight. But the rest of the car didn't see it. They only saw terror, a businessman, begging to keep his laptop, an old woman clutching her purse like a shield, a teenager trembling so hard his earbuds slipped from his ears. And they saw the hijackers as monsters, untouchable, holding life and death in their rifles. Yet somewhere in that steel corridor of fear, the beginning of resistance had already taken root, invisible to most but undeniable to the few who knew what it meant to read chaos with calm. Maya's fingers pressed lightly against her back, not for comfort, but for reassurance. Inside it was nothing but clothes and a notebook, but stitched in the lining was an old Ranger patch. A relic she had once thought of throwing away but couldn't, and in that moment, with voices rising, fear thickening, she knew that she wasn't done with that life after all, because history has a way of pulling the unwilling back into its grasp, and before the end of that ride, before the sun set on that day, the quiet woman they all thought they knew would hold a rifle again, not because she wanted to, but because someone would place it in her hands, and she would remember exactly who she was. The air inside the train had grown thick, every breath tinged with the metallic taste of fear. Passengers frozen in their seats while the terrorists prowled the aisles, rifles swinging in sharp arcs, their voices filling the car with the kind of authority that relies not on respect, but on violence. And though most obeyed, heads down, hands trembling, there were 2 who measured the chaos differently. Captain Daniel Rhodes, who sat 2 cars back, and Maya Carter, who had forced herself to remain unseen even as her instincts screamed at her to act. Rhodes had been through hostage situations before, though never like this, never unarmed, never with civilians stacked shoulder to shoulder in a steel tube hurtling across countryside. But training sharpened his mind, narrowing his focus to possibilities, and as his eyes tracked the men, as he noted the leader's dominance and the way the others deferred to him, he also noticed her again. The woman who had not flinched, who did not whimper when the butt of a rifle smashed into the armrest near her, who lowered her head just enough to appear submissive, but whose gaze, in those fleeting seconds when no one was watching, was scanning exits, mapping patterns, counting attackers, and Rhodes knew, as only a soldier knows, that she wasn't like the others, that she had been trained, that she was waiting. The first shots rang out not as executions, but as warnings. Bullets fired into the ceiling, plaster falling like chalk dust onto the terrified passengers, the terrorists shouting that they would kill if demands were not met, that the government had until noon to respond. And still Maya sat still, her breath steady, her hands clasped over her bag as if in prayer, but her eyes flicked toward the connecting door, where Rhodes now moved, sliding forward under the guise of compliance, his broad frame bent low, his voice a calming whisper to the man beside him. Breathe, just breathe. But his intent was not comfort, it was cover. Every movement designed to carry him closer, every step measured to bring him into Maya's car. And when at last the door slid open with a metallic groan, she looked up just long enough for their eyes to lock again. A second of silent agreement passing between strangers turned allies, The terrorists barked at him, shoving him down, but Rhodes used the fall to tuck himself near the floor, his hand slipping inside his jacket to retrieve the single weapon he carried, a compact sidearm hidden in a shoulder holster, a weapon he had not wanted to reveal yet, but which necessity demanded. And in that moment, as he slid it discreetly under the seat and let his jacket fall to cover it, Maya's gaze sharpened, recognizing not only the weapon but the trust it represented. The next minutes blurred, panic thickening as one of the passengers resisted, a young man in a business suit who thought he could grab a rifle. And in the struggle, the shot that followed was not into the ceiling but into flesh. The sound louder, crueler, the man collapsing in the aisle as screams tore through the car, the terrorists shouting louder to drown them out. But something else shifted then, something subtle but decisive, because Rhodes had already moved, his hand finding the sidearm, firing twice into the chest of the nearest attacker, the shots reverberating like thunder in the confined space. One terrorist down before he could even cry out, and chaos erupted, civilians screaming, dropping to the floor, rifles swinging wildly, bullets tearing into seats, and Rhodes barked at them to get down, his voice like steel, commanding even in civilian clothes. And yet he knew he was outnumbered, outgunned, his pistol small against their rifles, his rounds finite against their magazines. And it was then, as muzzle flashes lit the car, as adrenaline surged like fire in his veins, that his eyes cut once more to Maya. And in that split second of decision, of desperation and clarity, he made the choice that would alter everything. He slid the rifle from the dead terrorist's hands, crawled across the aisle under fire, and thrust it toward her. The crowd gasped, voices rising in disbelief, some shouting, "She's just a civilian." But Rhodes didn't waver, his voice low, firm, as he pressed the weapon into her hands. "I can't hold them alone. You, help me." And Maya, without hesitation, without a flicker of doubt, checked the chamber with movements so fluid they silenced the car, chambering the rifle like she had done it 1,000 times before, because she had. Whispers rippled through the passengers. Who is she? How does she know? But Maya ignored them, her body snapping into a stance long buried but never forgotten, her breathing slow, controlled, her finger poised but not trembling. And for the first time since the hijacking began, the balance shifted, because now it wasn't one Marine against many. It was two soldiers, trained, united, their presence radiating a steadiness that cut through the chaos. Together they moved, Rhodes taking the left flank, Maya covering the right, their voices low but clear as they guided. Civilians into cover, stay down, stay quiet, crawl toward the back. And though bullets ripped through cushions and splintered windows, their rhythm held, Rhodes firing with precision, Maya adjusting her aim with the kind of deadly calm that only years of training could shape, her rifle barking once, twice, each shot deliberate, each movement efficient, and the terrorists, who had entered with swagger, now faltered, retreating toward the middle of the car, confused by the sudden discipline, shaken by the realization that they were not facing unarmed civilians but something else entirely. Time seemed to fracture then, every second stretching, every heartbeat louder than the gunfire, Maya's mind splitting between action and memory, flashes of past patrols surfacing, sand, smoke, the cries of men who never came home. But she forced them down, anchoring herself to the present, to the terrified faces around her who needed her steady, and as Rhodes pressed forward, she mirrored him, there. Movements like two halves of the same drill, until the corridor that had felt like a prison moments before now felt like a battlefield tilted in their favor. Still, ammunition thinned, the rifle's magazine lighter with each shot, and Maya calculated with grim clarity that they could not hold forever, that reinforcements had to arrive or they would be overrun. But she also knew something else, that the momentum was theirs now, that they had given the passengers something the hijackers had stolen. Hope, and in that fragile hope lay strength. One of the terrorists tried to rally, shouting over the din, raising his weapon toward a cluster of civilians. But Maya's shot was faster, knocking him back into the aisle, and the gasps that followed weren't of fear but of awe. The civilians now realizing the woman they had ignored all morning, the one they thought was just another face in the crowd, had become their protector. And when Rhodes called her Ranger, under his breath, his voice rough, with respect, she didn't correct him, she didn't flinch. She simply adjusted her stance and kept firing, because she knew titles didn't matter anymore. What mattered was survival, and survival demanded that she step fully into who she had once been, the soldier she had promised she'd never be again. And as the train hurtled forward into uncertain miles, her rifle steady, her breath calm, Maya Carter knew there was no going back. Not now, not ever, because the battle had chosen her, and she had answered. Smoke clung to the air like a living thing, curling into every crevice of the train as the echoes of gunfire faded into the relentless rhythm of wheels on rails. The once ordinary morning now carved into a battlefield of overturned seats, shattered glass, and terrified whispers. Yet through it all, two figures still stood steady. Captain Daniel Rhodes, his pistol heavy but nearly spent, and Maya Carter, her rifle cradled with the instinct of someone who had once lived and breathed combat. Their presence the only barrier between chaos and massacre. The terrorists had been forced back toward the middle cars, their leader bellowing in fury, shouting for regrouping, for retaliation. But his words sounded less like commands and more like desperation, because the certainty with which they had stormed the train had been replaced by the realization that they had miscalculated, that they had not only encountered resistance but resistance trained, disciplined, unyielding. And though Rhodes's chest heaved, though sweat streaked down his face, he caught Maya's eye across the narrow aisle. And in that brief flicker he saw no fear, only focus, the kind of sharp calm forged in crucibles most would never survive. Together they moved again, advancing inch by inch, guiding the civilians further back, Rhodes barking commands. Keep low. Move when I say. While Maya's voice cut through the panic with a steadiness that steadied others. You're going to be fine. Just keep your head down. And those simple words, delivered in a tone more certain than any weapon, gave the passengers something they hadn't had since the hijacking began. Belief that they might live. But survival still hung by a thread, because with every step forward the terrorists grew more cornered, and cornered men are dangerous. One of them unleashing a spray of bullets that shattered windows and punched holes through steel, shards flying like knives, civilians screaming as sparks lit the floor, and Maya dropped to a knee, returning fire with precision that silenced him mid-breath, her shot clean, efficient, final. And the car went quiet again save for the cries of a child muffled against her mother's chest. The leader snarled then, rage twisting his face beneath the mast, pulling a passenger, a boy no older than 16, into the aisle, pressing a rifle against his temple as he roared demands, shouting for the shooting to stop, for the weapons to be dropped. And for a moment the entire train held its breath, the boy's sobs filling the silence, the civilians frozen, Rhodes tightening his grip on his pistol, knowing he had only one round left, his jaw clenching as his mind raced. And in that heartbeat Maya made the choice, stepping out from cover, her rifle raised but her voice louder than the leader's. Steady, cutting through his threats. You don't want to do this, not today, not with me standing here. And the leader scoffed, his grip tightening on the boy, but then his eyes narrowed as he studied her, as he saw the stance, the certainty, the defiance of someone who wasn't bluffing. And though he spat words of hatred, though he tried to paint himself as untouchable, he shifted his aim for just a second, enough for Rhodes to act, his final bullet striking true, sending the leader staggering back, the boy stumbling free, and in that instant Maya advanced, her rifle barking once, then again, until the leader fell, his weapon clattering uselessly against the floor, silence crashing over the car in his wake. For a long moment no one moved, no one breathed. The only sound the steady hum of the train as it barreled through countryside that had no idea what horrors played out inside. And then, slowly, civilians began to rise, their faces wide-eyed, stunned, gazes fixed not on Rhodes but on Maya, on the woman they had thought was just another passenger, the one who had sat quietly, headphones dangling, travel bag at her knees, now revealed as something entirely different, her rifle lowered but her posture unbroken, her chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. And as Rhodes approached, as he placed a hand on her shoulder, his words were simple, rough with gratitude and respect. Ranger, you saved them. And for the first time that day Maya let herself exhale, the weight of the rifle suddenly heavier in her arms, the memories of years past pressing against her like ghosts. Yet she did not break, She only nodded, eyes scanning once more to confirm the civilians were safe. The remaining terrorists subdued, the danger contained. Minutes later, the sound of helicopters grew distant but rising. The rhythmic thump of rotors announcing reinforcements racing toward them. Military response teams prepared to storm the train, but they would find a battle already decided. A group of civilians already shielded, and two soldiers, one unwilling, one unexpected, who had held the line. As troops flooded the car, securing weapons, tending the wounded, ushering the civilians into safety, Rhodes finally turned to Maya with the question burning in his chest. "Who are you?" And she hesitated only a moment, her gaze drifting to the patch sewn inside her bag, to the years she had tried to bury, before she answered quietly, almost to herself, "Former Army, 75th Ranger Regiment. I thought I left it behind." And in that instant, the whispers spread among the civilians, all mingling with disbelief. The realization sinking in that the woman who had saved them wasn't just brave, she had been one of the elite, someone who had carried that weight before, and though she had hidden among them, though she had blended into their world of routine and anonymity, when the moment demanded, she had stepped forward with the kind of courage that rewrites lives. Outside, the sun had climbed higher, its light spilling into the shattered windows, illuminating faces streaked with tears, with soot, with relief. And as the train finally slowed, grinding toward the station where police and medics waited, the civilians turned to her, some whispering thanks, some reaching to touch her arm as if to anchor themselves to the strength she radiated. And Maya, though she accepted their gratitude, though she let them see her smile faintly for the first time, knew that her life had changed again, that no matter how far she had run from the soldier she once was, the truth was this: she still carried it within her, and perhaps always would. Closing narration settles on the truth of that day, not just the bullets or the bodies or the fear, but the revelation that courage is not always loud, not always wrapped in medals or uniforms. Sometimes it hides in plain sight, in the quiet resolve of a woman who sat unnoticed until the world needed her most, and when asked why she had acted, why she had risked her life for strangers, Maya Carter's answer was as steady as her aim: because someone had to. And if you believe that ordinary people can rise to extraordinary courage when history calls them, share this story, because someone out there, watching now, needs the reminder that inside the quietest lives sometimes waits the loudest kind of bravery.